guys. Let's go. Again for just the many life hours that he has put into putting together all that information and presentation. We will be able to have copies of the slide presentations available as well. You know, so I know. So those of you who, God forbid, were sleeping or something, won't miss out on the information. Great. Well, we're going to go ahead and do a brief review of the introduction to logical reasoning. Now, this is material that was put up on the website that was preparation material that I know every single one of you looked over. And I have no doubt that all 133 of you spent all the time that you could looking over the prep material. No, I mean, hopefully you did. We do want to get that material out to you ahead of time, because when we start to do these sessions, we really want to make these sessions lively and interactive, and not just have it be a big information dump on you, you know? Stuff that you could otherwise read in a book or something like that. Read that ahead of time so that way you can come and we can do something with the information. And that's what Tyrone and I are looking forward to being able to do some for the balance of the time that we have this evening. Is, you know, Tyrone presented just some great information. He fashioned it into some very compelling arguments, and, you know, was able to field some questions and address some things. It's not, you know, again, apologetics is not just about gathering information, but what do you do with the information, right? How do you use it? How do you get good at doing it and using it in different situations? It's sort of like, you know, it's kind of like Kung Fu or Jun Keat Do, you know? Jun Keat Do, you know what that was? What?
I wouldn't know.
Oh, come on, man.
Bruce Lee.
Yes.
It was his own self-styled martial art.
Yes.
That he created.
Yep.
Yeah, it's real. It's real.
Jun Keat Do is a martial arts style that Bruce Lee basically developed, but what was innovative about it is that he knew all of the old forms of martial arts. And martial arts was very rigid and had a lot of certain forms and movements, and he knew all that, but then he kind of broke it free out of the forms and the movements and just developed a style that was basically what's going on with your opponent to learn how to defend yourself and beat them, right? And in some ways, learning the basics of these logical arguments and learning logical argumentation and reasoning is to empower you to do that. You don't just have to repeat, you know, Lee Strobel is great. You don't just have to repeat Lee Strobel to give people answers, right? Doug Jacoby is awesome, right? I love Doug personally. But you don't just have to parrot Doug Jacoby to engage people in these questions. If you understand some of the foundational building blocks of logic and argumentation and how to use this information, it kind of frees you up, right? So depending on who you're talking to and who you're interacting with, what kind of person they are, where they're coming from, you'll be more effective and more equipped to really engage them in a great dialogue, right? You'll be more equipped to give that good answer, that 1 Peter 3 explanation in terms that they can understand and will relate to them, right? You'll be able to more adequately demolish that lofty opinion, right? In a way that's going to make sense to them. And by the way, we demolish arguments, not people. There's a difference, right? Truthfully, that's what Paul says. We demolish arguments, not people, right? We'll talk a little bit more about that tomorrow when another brother will be doing a presentation on interacting with atheists, dialogue with atheists and skeptics, but we're to refute false doctrines, but not get involved in stupid and quarrel arguments and be resentful toward people. And there's a difference between the two. But again, understanding the basics of logical reasoning are really going to, that is what is going to empower us to be able to do that. I'm just going to briefly go through a couple of the slides that, again, ideally, you should have some familiarity with if you went over the preparation materials. Logic. Logic is basically ordered thinking, okay? A technical definition would be the study of right reasons or valid inferences and the attending fallacies, formal and informal. Now, when I first saw that definition, I had to look up just about every noun that was used, right? To find out what they meant. We'll talk a little bit, more about those. Hopefully, they'll become more familiar. What you'll find is the more familiar you get with things like, the foundations of reasoning and logical arguments, this is all just very regular stuff. We use this stuff in life all the time. We don't know that it has these other names in the formal study of logic, but it's ordered thinking as opposed to disordered thinking. And it's clear in the Bible. Logic is not something that we create. It's something that we discover. Logic has been embedded into creation, okay, by God. He makes order out of chaos. Genesis chapter 1 teaches that from the very beginning, right? He orders things. What it says in John chapter 1 about who Jesus is, the Logos, right? Obviously the Greek root word for logic there. The order, the logic, the wisdom, the reason of God behind all creation. So through him all things were made, right? All things were made just embedded with this order and this logic, and so we discover it. And some people think that being a Christian is sort of antithesis of being being logical. That's something called a false dilemma. We'll learn about that in a little bit. But I think exactly the opposite. Being a Christian has just helped me to order my thinking even better, and has helped me to understand reasons and arguments even better. Study of the Scripture. Understanding how God has ordered, not just the cosmoses or science or biology, but how God has ordered us as spiritual beings, because that's what the Bible really talks about, right? Those matters of the heart, things like greed and honesty and love and sacrifice, right? These are all spiritual dynamics that the world kind of knows about, but how are they ordered? How are they put together? How do they work together in a right way versus a wrong way? The Scriptures reveal that spiritual logic to us. We're spiritual beings. We have a spiritual dimension. There's an order to the way that spirituality works. So logic is embedded in creation. In terms of argumentation, there is Aristotelian logic. This is primarily what you'll learn about if you take like a logic course in school or class or university. And there's 4 rules to Aristotelian logic, right? Anything that's ordered has to have some rules, right? Some ground rules. So there's 4 basic rules. And again, these are really simple. You already know these. The first is the rule of identity. And that is just that A is A. If I say A, I mean A. If I say A, I don't mean B. If I say A, I don't mean C. If I say A, I mean A. 1 is 1, 2 is 2, right? Really simple. Makes sense. The rule of non-contradiction, A is not negative A, right? Something can't also at the same time be its opposite, okay? That is not allowed, right? That would be illogical to say that A is also the same thing as negative A. That makes sense, right? Have I lost you here yet? Great.
Good stuff.
Number 3, the rule of excluded middle. Either A or negative A, you can't have it both ways, okay? It's got to be one or it's got to be the other. There's not this middle ground where it's sort of one or sort of another. It's kind of like being saved in Christianity, right? You're either saved or you're not saved. We talk through that with people, you know what I mean? You're not sort of, kind of. It's just sort of like there's thresholds that you have crossed by the grace of God or not, but, that's the rule of the excluded middle. And then the rule of rational inference, and that just means that when you crunch all of these dynamics together, you can come out with a conclusion, right? 1 plus 1 equals 2. Being able to say 1 plus 1 equals 2 is like a rational inference. So the 4 basic rules. Then there are the basic building blocks. Sorry, did I go? Okay, yeah. The building blocks of reasoning. We want to build an argument, okay? An argument is something that we build. In the slides, I try to use the analogy of building a house, right? and you use different materials to build that house. You use wood, and you use brick, and you use, mortar, and you use windows and all sorts of other things. If you're building an argument, it's like a house. There's different things that you are using. The basic building blocks, or what an argument is, a collection of related propositions resulting in a conclusion. All right? Well, there's that word proposition. That's an interesting word. What does a proposition mean, right? Well, a proposition is a declarative statement that affirms or denies something. That's just like a regular sentence, okay? Paulo is here. That is a proposition. That's I'm declaring something, I'm affirming something, okay? If I were to leave the room, someone would say, Paulo is not here. That would then be a proposition. They're declaring something that is denying something, right? A premise. A premise is a kind of proposition that sets forth a reason to draw a conclusion. And the conclusion is a proposition, also a kind of proposition, a declarative statement derived from the inferences of its premises. You'll see how all this works, hopefully a little bit today, but also tomorrow when we will be talking through what I like to call God-friendly arguments. Philosophical arguments that are consistent with the existence of God as Christianity describes God. The basics of reasoning, right? So an argument is like a house, okay? And what we're looking at here is two basic kinds of arguments that you can build, like two different kinds of houses that you can build, okay? One is called an inductive reasoning or an inductive argument, okay? And that's like scientific or legal reasoning. It comes to a probable conclusion, okay? What you're doing is you're kind of collecting evidence and information, and you're funneling it towards, hey, this is most likely, probably the best answer that I think we can get from all of this, right? How many of you like law shows? Yeah, there's lots of law shows out there. So, when you see, like, in Law and Order, you know what I mean? When you see Sam, what's his face? Waterman or something, well, he's up there and he's talking about, he's bringing up, evidence, and he's got the testimony of the detectives, and he's putting it all together. That's an example of he's doing inductive reasoning. He's pulling together pieces of evidence, and then he says, and so, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, right, the most likely, probable, plausible, beyond a reasonable doubt conclusion is that this person did it, right? Inductive reasoning. We also see that in science, when you build a scientific theory, right? You're gathering data, information, you're running tests, and so you're saying, okay, based on what we have, this theory that I'm proposing is probably the best way to look at this natural phenomenon and how it works. Deductive reasoning is Sherlock Holmes, right? You guys like Sherlock Holmes? Yeah. Right? He's the king of deductive reasoning. And that's more like philosophical, mathematical type of reasoning, okay? You're coming to a necessary conclusion, okay? If your premises are true, then that conclusion has to be true, no other way, right? 1 + 1 = 2. Okay, that has to be true. If 1 is 1, if 1 is not the same as -1, and if you can only have 1, and if you add that to another 1, you've got to get 2, okay? That's not just probable, that's necessary, okay? You can't get 3, you can't get another 1, right? That is just true, that is the answer. Two different kinds of arguments to be used, again, based on the situation. Based on the situation that you're in, based on what you are, what you are presented with. Inductive and deductive reasoning. Those are the basics of logic. The other part of the slide material was on what are called informal fallacies, informal logical fallacies. And what those are all the different ways that you can kind of twist or sort of mess up an argument, okay? And there were 21 different informal fallacies listed on those slides. What